Oh my God. Oh,
Miami County 911.
Oh my! Somebody broke into my home. Somebody broke into my home and shot my wife.
Are they still in there?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, what's the address?
Please hurry! Please hurry!
Okay. What are you seeing?
My wife she's got 2 shots to her head. There's blood everywhere. Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Sir, please.
All right, ma'am, I need you to take a deep breath, okay? Do you still see anybody in the house?
No, the door to the garage was wide open. Please hurry, please. Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! My daughters are here. My daughters are here.
Where's she at?
She's in the bed. She's in the bed.
Are you with her?
Yeah, I am in the room. I'm looking at her. Yes, please.
Okay, do you guys have the door locked?
We have the doors to the garage locked, but into the house, yes. Please. Oh my God, oh my God.
It was still dark in Tip City, Ohio, when a phone rang inside the emergency dispatch center. The call came in just after the quietest hour of the night, that moment when most homes are silent, lights are off, and entire neighborhoods sleep without fear. But on this morning, that silence had already been broken. A man's voice burst through the line, shaking, frantic, almost breathless. He didn't start with his name. He didn't explain what had happened in order. He just pleaded, "Oh my God, somebody broke into my home. Somebody broke into my home and shot my wife." In the background, you can hear movement, panic, confusion. The caller's words tumble over each other as if his mind can't keep up with what his eyes are seeing. He says there is blood everywhere. He says she has been shot in the head. He says the garage door is open. And he says he doesn't think she's breathing. Inside that house were also 2 children, asleep in their rooms, unaware that their lives had just changed forever. Police rushed to the quiet suburban neighborhood, expecting to hunt for a killer who had just fled into the darkness. Officers prepared for a dangerous search. If an armed intruder had really invaded the home, he could still be nearby. But within hours, the story would begin to shift. Because the man on the phone was not just a grieving husband. He was a former American Idol contestant, a church worship leader, a father, a neighbor who appeared, by all accounts, to live an ordinary life. And the woman he claimed was taken from him, 37-year-old Ashley Flynn, was a teacher, a volleyball coach, and a mother known in her community for kindness and warmth. At first, it looked like a nightmare burglary. Then investigators stepped inside the house. What they found would slowly turn a home invasion tragedy into something far darker, a case where the emergency call itself might become one of the most important pieces of evidence. Because sometimes, in true crime cases, the first story told is not always the real one. When officers arrived at the Flynn residence in Tip City, the flashing red and blue lights cut across an otherwise peaceful suburban street. Neighbors would later say they were jolted awake by the sirens, confused, peering through blinds at a scene that made no sense in their quiet community. It was the kind of neighborhood where people left porch lights on for comfort, not for protection. Inside the home, police found 37-year-old Ashley Flynn unresponsive. According to court records, she had suffered gunshot wounds to the head. First responders assessed the scene quickly. There were no immediate signs of an active threat. No suspect fleeing on foot. No shattered windows suggesting a hurried escape. No obvious forced entry, consistent with a chaotic home invasion in progress. Her husband, Caleb Flynn, was there when officers arrived. He had been the one on the phone with dispatch. The panic in his voice during the 911 call would soon be replayed again and again across news broadcasts and social media platforms. In the recording, he claimed that someone had broken into their home, shot his wife, and left the garage door open. He said there was blood everywhere. He said she wasn't breathing. Upstairs, their children were in their bedrooms. Officers immediately secured the property and began what they believed would be a search for a potentially armed intruder. K-9 units were deployed. Drones scanned the surrounding area. Law enforcement treated the situation as active and dangerous. If someone had entered the home in the early hours of the morning, shot a woman twice, and fled, they would not be far. But as the perimeter expanded and the search continued, something became clear. No suspect was found. No footprints leading away into the darkness. No neighbors reporting a suspicious person running down the street. No reports of gunfire echoing through the area beyond the single residence. Inside the house, detectives began the slow, methodical process of documenting the scene. Every homicide investigation follows a strict pattern. Photographs, measurements, shell casings, blood spatter, entry points, exit points, trajectories. They do not rely on emotion. They rely on physics. And what they were seeing began to raise questions. According to investigators, the shooting was carried out with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. The allegation that would later appear in court documents stated that Ashley had been shot inside the home and that the scene may have been altered afterward. Prosecutors would use the word staged. It is a powerful word in criminal courtrooms. Staging, in the context of homicide investigations, refers to the manipulation of a crime scene to mislead authorities. It can involve moving objects, opening doors, breaking items, or creating the appearance of a burglary that never occurred. It suggests planning after the act. It suggests consciousness of guilt. At this stage in the investigation, the authorities have not publicly detailed every piece of evidence that led them to that conclusion. But the charges tell their own story. In addition to one count of murder, Caleb Flynn was charged with 2 counts of felonious assault with a deadly weapon and 2 counts of tampering with evidence. Tampering with evidence is not a charge that appears lightly. It implies that investigators believe something was deliberately altered to obstruct the truth. The 911 call quickly became central to the narrative. In the recording, Caleb can be heard describing the condition of his wife in vivid detail. He tells the dispatcher she has been shot in the head. He says her face is white as a ghost. He repeatedly insists someone broke in. He emphasizes that the garage door was wide open. A dispatch relays the information to responding units. Female shot in the head. Not responding. Unknown if suspect still inside. Garage door open. When officers arrived, they found Caleb inside the home. According to reports, he told authorities that only the 4 family members had been present: himself, Ashley, and their 2 children. He said the children were asleep and unaware of what had happened. The official search of the property and surrounding area did not yield a fleeing gunman. As dawn broke over Tip City, what had initially appeared to be a violent home invasion began to shift into something more complex. Detectives often look for inconsistencies between a reported narrative and the physical evidence. In alleged staged burglaries, there are sometimes signs that do not align with a genuine forced entry. A door may be open but undamaged. Items may appear disturbed but not stolen. The randomness expected in a burglary may be absent. Authorities have not publicly released every forensic detail, but court documents later alleged that the crime scene had been manipulated in an attempt to mislead officers. Meanwhile, news of the incident began to spread rapidly. It did not take long for reporters to uncover a detail that made the case even more public. Caleb Flynn had once appeared on Season 12 of American Idol. During his audition segment, he had spoken warmly about his wife. In archived clips, he described loving her deeply. He spoke about faith, about family, about being an ordinary person who loved to sing. The contrast was immediate and jarring. By Thursday, just days after the shooting, Dr. Caleb Flynn was arrested by the Tip City Police Department. He was booked into the Miami County Jail. Court records show he was formally charged and later arraigned. He entered a plea of not guilty. His bond was set at $2 million. In a statement to Fox News Digital, his attorney argued that authorities had rushed to judgment. The defense suggested that when investigators exhaust leads in a case involving a spouse, they often turn to the surviving partner too quickly. The attorney questioned the speed and thoroughness of the investigation and described the bond as excessively high. The defense narrative is a familiar one in cases of alleged domestic homicide. Statistically, when a person is killed inside their home with no signs of forced entry and no immediate suspect identified, though investigators frequently scrutinize those closest to the victim. It is not an assumption of guilt. It is a pattern based on data. But in court, statistics do not convict people. Evidence does. At the same time, media outlets such as TMZ reported that investigators believed a 9mm semi-automatic handgun was used in the shooting. That detail would likely become crucial in court. Ballistics analysis can determine whether a specific weapon fired a specific bullet. Gunshot residue testing can reveal whether someone recently discharged a firearm. Blood spatter patterns can indicate distance, position, and movement at the moment shots were fired. Those forensic findings, however, have not yet been fully presented publicly. Much of that evidence, if it exists, will surface during pretrial hearings and eventual trial proceedings. For the community, the immediate impact was personal. Ashley Flynn was known locally as a substitute teacher and volleyball coach. Tributes began appearing online. Parents and students expressed shock. Friends described her as kind and devoted to her children. The image of a mother killed inside her own home in the middle of the night shook the sense of security in the area. Tip City Police Chief Greg Adkins told media that authorities believed the incident was isolated and that there was no ongoing threat to the public. That statement alone hinted at investigators' growing confidence that this was not a random act by a roaming criminal. But behind every public statement, there is a private investigative strategy unfolding. Detectives would have examined timelines. What time were the shots fired? Were neighbors able to confirm hearing gunfire? When exactly was the 911 call placed relative to the estimated time of death? Did digital records from phones, smart devices, or home security systems reveal movement patterns inside the house? They would have analyzed the physical positioning of the body, the location of shell casings, whether there were signs of struggle, whether there were defensive wounds, and perhaps most importantly, they would have compared every physical finding to the narrative provided in that initial frantic phone call. Because in cases where staging is alleged, small inconsistencies can become the foundation of a prosecution. Did the open garage door show signs of forced entry? Were valuables taken? Was anything actually missing from the home? Did the pattern of blood match a sudden attack by a stranger? Or something else? These are the questions that quietly shape a murder case long before it reaches a jury. By the end of that first week, the narrative had fully shifted. What began as a reported home invasion became an alleged domestic homicide. Caleb Flynn remained in custody, maintaining his innocence. His legal team prepared to challenge the evidence. Prosecutors prepared to defend their charges. And in the middle of it all were two children who had slept through the gunfire, unaware that their lives were about to become part of a courtroom battle that would draw national attention. In the coming weeks, more details would emerge: forensic reports, hearing transcripts, possibly motive theories. But in these early days, one thing was clear. The truth of what happened inside that house in the early hours of February 16th would not be determined by panic, so speculation, or headlines. It would be determined by evidence. And if investigators are correct, the most important clues were not outside the house in the darkness. They were inside, waiting to tell a story very different from the one first reported over the phone. As investigators continued their work behind closed doors, the public story moved forward without waiting for answers. News trucks lined the streets outside the Flynn home. Reporters replayed the 911 call again and again, slowing it down, isolating phrases, asking viewers to listen closely to the panic in Caleb Flynn's voice. Was it real terror or something else? In true crime cases, tone becomes evidence long before facts do. The call itself was haunting. Caleb's words were rushed, overlapping, desperate. He described blood everywhere. He described the gunshots, and he emphasized the open garage door. He repeatedly framed the moment as a sudden invasion, something violent and unexpected that had shattered their home in the middle of the night. To the dispatcher, it sounded like a nightmare unfolding in real time. But to experienced investigators, emergency calls are more than emotional recordings. They are timelines. Every second matters. Every phrase is weighed against what the caller could reasonably know at that moment. One detail stood out almost immediately. Caleb described the nature of Ashley's injuries with precision. He referenced gunshots to the head before medical personnel had arrived. Prosecutors would later argue that such details suggested knowledge inconsistent with discovering a wounded spouse moments earlier. And the defense would counter that shock can cause people to speak inaccurately or emotionally, especially when confronted with trauma. This is where true crime cases often pivot, not on what was said, but on what can be proven. Inside the house, forensic teams continued their examination. Blood stain pattern analysis is one of the most revealing tools in violent crime investigations. The direction, shape, and distribution of blood can indicate where a victim was standing or lying when they were shot, how close the shooter was, and whether the body or objects were moved afterward. Investigators would also have focused on gunshot residue. Microscopic particles expelled when a firearm is discharged can linger on skin and clothing. Residue testing does not automatically prove guilt, but it can support or contradict a person's account of events. Or if a suspect claims they never handled or fired a weapon, residue findings become highly significant. Ballistics analysis would also play a key role. If a 9mm semi-automatic handgun was used, as authorities allege, matching bullets or shell casings to a specific firearm could be decisive. Whether that weapon belonged to the household, whether it was registered, and whether it could be accounted for after the shooting are questions that have not yet been publicly answered. While investigators worked quietly, the defense team moved quickly. In statements to the media, Caleb Flynn's attorney framed the case as a cautionary tale about tunnel vision. The argument was clear. When police fail to identify an outside suspect, they often turn their focus inward. The surviving spouse becomes the most convenient explanation. And it is a strategy that has worked in past cases, especially when physical evidence is ambiguous or incomplete. But prosecutors rarely bring multiple felony charges without believing they can support them. 2 counts of tampering with evidence suggested investigators believed more than one action was taken to mislead authorities. That could mean moving objects, altering entry points, manipulating the scene in more than one way. Those allegations would not be made lightly. Meanwhile, the image of Caleb Flynn in the public eye began to shift. Clips from his appearance on American Idol resurfaced online. In them, he spoke warmly about his wife, praising her beauty and support. He presented himself as a man of faith, a husband deeply in love. The viewers were forced to reconcile that image with the man now sitting in a jail cell facing murder charges. This contrast is one of the reasons cases like this grip the public imagination. The accused does not fit the stereotype of a violent criminal. There were no public records of prior arrests, no immediate reports of domestic violence, no obvious warning signs visible from the outside. But criminologists will often say that the most dangerous relationships are not always the loudest or most visibly unstable. As days passed, more subtle details began to surface through reporting. Authorities confirmed that only 4 people were inside the home that night. No neighbors reported seeing anyone approach or flee the property. No vehicles were observed speeding away. Surveillance footage from nearby homes, if it exists, has not been publicly discussed. In alleged staged burglary cases, investigators often look for what is missing, not what is present. Were valuables taken? Were electronics missing? Was anything actually stolen? Random intruders typically do not commit targeted executions and leave without taking property. And they rarely enter occupied homes when children are present unless they know exactly who they are looking for. The open garage door became a focal point. Open doors can be staged easily, but forced entry leaves behind physical damage. Broken locks, splintered frames, tool marks. Investigators would have examined every hinge, latch, and handle. If there was no evidence of forced entry, the intruder narrative weakens significantly. At the same time, detectives would have reconstructed the timeline minute by minute. When was the last time Ashley was known to be alive? What was the activity on both spouses' phones? Were there text messages, calls, or app usage during the critical window? Did smart devices in the home record movement, sound, or door openings? Modern homicide investigations are as much digital they are physical. Then there is motive, the piece of the puzzle the public often fixates on, even though it is not legally required for conviction. Prosecutors do not need to prove why a crime occurred, only that it did. Still, motive can help a jury understand intent. As of now, no official motive has been publicly announced. That silence is intentional. Investigators often hold motive evidence back until court proceedings. It can include financial strain, marital conflict, infidelity, or personal crises that are not immediately visible to the public. What we do know is that prosecutors believe the shooting was not random. The bond amount reflected that belief. A $2 million bond is typically reserved for defendants considered a serious flight risk or a danger to the community. Defense attorneys criticized the amount as excessive, but judges set bond based on the severity of charges and the strength of the alleged evidence. Behind the scenes, preparations for the preliminary hearing were underway. That hearing would determine whether there was sufficient probable cause to move the case forward to trial. It is not about guilt or innocence. It is about whether prosecutors can show that a crime likely occurred and that the defendant likely committed it. For the Flynn children, none of this mattered. But their world had already been divided into before and after. Their mother was gone. Their father was behind bars. Their names were now part of a national story they did not choose. In cases like this, investigators often return repeatedly to the same question. If this was a burglary, what went wrong for the burglar? Why enter an occupied home? Why target one specific person? Why leave no trace? Why take nothing? Each unanswered question tightens the circle. At the same time, defense teams look for alternative explanations. Could an intruder have entered unnoticed? Could evidence have been misinterpreted? Could investigators have mistaken chaos for staging? These questions are not unreasonable. They are the foundation of reasonable doubt. This is why cases like this unfold slowly. Every forensic result, every digital record, and every witness statement becomes a thread in a much larger tapestry. As the legal process moved forward, one thing became increasingly clear. The truth of what happened inside that house would not hinge on emotion, reputation, or past television appearances. It would hinge on whether the physical and digital evidence could support one story and definitively dismantle the other. Because by now, there were only two possible explanations left. Either an unknown intruder committed a silent, targeted killing and vanished without a trace, or the danger had never come from outside the house at all. And in the final chapter of this story, the case would move from investigation to judgment, where those two narratives would finally collide. As the case moved toward its next court date, the narrative hardened on both sides. See, on one end stood the prosecution's theory. This was not a burglary gone wrong. It was not a masked intruder slipping through a quiet Ohio neighborhood under cover of darkness. It was, they allege, a calculated act carried out inside the walls of a family home, followed by an attempt to redirect suspicion outward. On the other end stood the defense, a grieving husband, quickly turned into a suspect, an investigation moving too fast, a rush to judgment shaped by statistics and assumptions rather than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Between those two positions sat a courtroom that would eventually decide which version matched reality. The preliminary hearing approached quietly, but behind the scenes, both teams were building their cases. Prosecutors would need to establish probable cause, not yet to convince a jury, but to show that the evidence justified moving forward. That threshold is lower than conviction, but it still requires substance. If the prosecution's case relies heavily on forensic science, Chapter 3 of this story becomes about precision. Gunshot residue testing, for example, is rarely dramatic. It does not scream guilt on its own. Residue can transfer from surface to surface. It can appear from proximity rather than discharge, but when paired with other findings, like the location of shell casings, the trajectory of bullets, and the position of the body, it can form a cohesive narrative. Ballistics is even more unforgiving. A 9mm semi-automatic handgun ejects casings in a specific direction. The pattern of those casings can indicate where the shooter stood. The bullets themselves carry microscopic markings from the barrel of the firearm that fired them. If a weapon is recovered and matched, that connection becomes powerful. And then there is blood. Blood stain pattern analysis often tells a story the human eye cannot immediately see. High-velocity spatter from a gunshot creates a mist-like distribution. Backspatter can travel onto the shooter. If a shooter is close enough, tiny droplets can land on clothing or skin. If someone claims they were not near the victim at the moment of the shooting, but microscopic analysis places them there, the gap between narrative and evidence widens. Prosecutors will likely argue that the alleged staging, the open garage door, any disturbed items, was inconsistent with a genuine break-in. True burglaries tend to leave chaotic footprints. Stolen property, rummaged drawers, forced locks. A staged scene, investigators often claim, can look theatrical, deliberate, but incomplete. The defense, however, will challenge interpretation. Forensics is not infallible. Experts can disagree. Bloodstain analysis, in particular, has been contested in past cases. Defense attorneys may call their own specialists to reinterpret patterns differently. They may argue contamination, mislabeling, or investigative bias. And then there is the 911 call, the emotional anchor of this entire case. Jurors, if this case reaches trial, will hear that recording. They will listen for authenticity, for shock, for grief. Some will hear panic and believe it. Others may focus on specific phrases. The detail about the gunshots, the emphasis on the garage door, the repetition of the break-in narrative. The prosecution may suggest that the call was part of the staging, an attempt to establish an immediate alibi narrative. The defense will likely argue that trauma distorts language, that in moments of horror, people speak in fragments. That desperation does not follow a script. Human behavior under stress is unpredictable. That unpredictability cuts both ways in court. Another element that often surfaces in spousal homicide trials is relationship history. Financial strain, insurance policies, marital tension, text messages, arguments that neighbors never saw. If prosecutors introduce evidence of conflict, whether emotional, financial, or otherwise, it may provide the motive that has so far remained officially unspoken. But if no such evidence is presented, the defense gains ground. Without motive, the case becomes purely circumstantial, relying on physical findings and the dismantling of the intruder's story. The children, though largely shielded from public details, remain central to the timeline. They were reportedly asleep during the shooting. Prosecutors may argue that an intruder targeting a specific adult would be unlikely to leave children unharmed. The defense may counter that criminals act unpredictably and that sparing children does not automatically implicate a parent. Chief Greg Adkins of the Tip City Police Department stated early in the investigation that authorities believed the incident was isolated and that the public was not in danger. That statement carries weight. Law enforcement does not typically reassure a community so quickly unless they believe the threat originated within the home. Still, the belief is not proof. As the case moves deeper into the legal system, discovery will become crucial. Discovery is the phase in which both sides exchange evidence. Forensic reports, lab results, witness statements, digital records, body camera footage from responding officers. Every detail will be scrutinized. The defense may look for inconsistencies in how the scene was processed. Was it secured properly? Were there delays? Was evidence logged correctly? Even small procedural missteps can create reasonable doubt. Meanwhile, public opinion continues to form, sometimes faster than the courts can operate. Social media threads dissect the 911 audio. True crime commentators compare this case to others involving alleged staged burglaries. Archived clips from American Idol circulate again, showing Caleb Flynn praising his wife years earlier. The juxtaposition is stark, but courtrooms are not social media. In court, the presumption of innocence stands firm. Caleb Flynn has pleaded not guilty. That plea shifts the burden entirely onto the state. Prosecutors must prove every element of the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. That he knowingly caused Ashley's death, that he used a deadly weapon, and that he tampered with evidence to mislead investigators. Reasonable doubt does not mean any doubt. It means doubt grounded in reason and evidence. If this case goes to trial, jurors will be asked to consider two starkly different narratives. The first, a violent intruder slipped into a quiet home, shot a mother twice in the head, and vanished into the night without taking anything, without being seen, and without leaving behind identifiable traces. Then the second, the shooting occurred inside the marriage, and the subsequent story of a break-in was constructed to redirect suspicion. Whichever narrative the jury believes must be supported not by emotion, but by measurable proof. And yet, beyond the legal battle, there is a human story that will never be resolved by a verdict. Ashley Flynn was more than a headline. She was a teacher, a coach, a mother whose children will grow up with fragmented memories and unanswered questions. Regardless of the outcome, her absence is permanent. For Caleb Flynn, the stakes could not be higher. A conviction would likely mean life in prison. An acquittal would not erase the years of scrutiny or the public suspicion that now surrounds his name. True crime cases often captivate us because they force us to confront uncomfortable truths. That violence can occur behind ordinary doors, that appearances can be misleading, and that the line between victim and suspect can shift in a matter of hours. In the early morning darkness of February 16th, a 911 call transformed a quiet Ohio home into the center of a national story. Since then, every statement, every forensic test, and every legal motion has moved this case closer to its final reckoning. But, as of now, the ultimate question remains unanswered in a court of law. Was this the work of an unseen intruder who disappeared without a trace? Or did the danger never come from outside at all? Until a jury hears the evidence and delivers a verdict, and the case of Ashley Flynn remains suspended between those two possibilities. A tragedy waiting for justice, and a courtroom battle that will decide which version of that night becomes the official truth.